Hi, I'm Corey Huff. I'm told that I'm supposed to welcome you to day 2 of Artexpo. So, welcome. Today we're going to talk about art marketing. We're going to talk about specifically about early careers in art marketing and selling art on the internet. My talk is entitled "The Hidden Path of Fine Art Careers." I'm making a couple of assumptions today. I'm assuming that all of you are artists because you're here, and I'm assuming that none of you are making $1 million selling art yet, and maybe just getting started on the path towards a full-time art career. So, how many of you went to art school, BFA or MFA? A couple of you? All right. Yeah, all right, great. So, when you were in art school, I imagine that all of your art professors gave you some advice. They said, make lots and lots of art, right? They said, when you get out of here, make a lot of art. And then something will happen, and you will profit. That question mark is what we're going to talk about today. What is that question mark that's supposed to happen? All right. The hidden path of fine art careers. The hidden path is what I've given name to a phenomenon that I've noticed. Artists who I know who have created financially viable careers for themselves, and the steps that they've taken, the behaviors that they have, the things they do that most people don't talk about. It's not the stuff that gets in the press. It's not the stuff that you learn in art school. It's a secret set of actions and codes that you undertake in order to make it as an artist. And that's the hidden path. All right, so in order to succeed in selling art now, every artist needs 3 things. One is you need a good body of work. And what a good body of work or what good art means is a subject that's up for great debate. I'm not going to define it here. Good art means whatever it means to you. We all know artists who are great who don't sell very much, and we all know artists who are pretty mediocre who sell a lot. So whatever good art means to you, but what I am looking for when I'm working with an artist is to say, do you have a vision in your work? Do you have a through line? Do you have a body of work where I can look at it and say, yeah, that looks like it was made by the same artist in the same time period, maybe with similar ideas? And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. A website that sells. Now, when I'm talking about this stuff today, what I'm primarily talking about is artists who are taking it upon themselves to sell their own work, whether or not they're with a gallery. So I'm not going to touch on gallery sales in this talk today, but everything that I talk about today can work if you are in a gallery and will help you sell your work if you are in a gallery. So a website that sells. I'm going to talk in detail about what this means, but essentially a website that looks like it's well designed, it looks beautiful, it's easy to navigate, it loads well, and people can actually buy stuff on the website. A lot of artists have portfolio websites that look really nice, but you can't buy anything from that website. E-commerce is so common now, it's an expectation that people can buy stuff on your website. And an audience with money. You can be really good at selling, you can have great art, but if you don't have an audience with money, you won't get anywhere. And I see a lot of artists with... Last year, I had an artist come to me, he had 1 million followers on Facebook, and he wasn't making any sales off of it, because it was the wrong audience. So we'll talk about how to get the right audience today, too. So, how to double your sales. So let's assume that you are making less than a full-time income as an artist, or maybe you're just getting started selling. How can you double your sales in the next 30 days? Spend more time selling. It seems kind of silly that I have to mention it, but I talk to a lot of artists who don't spend enough time selling. What does enough time mean? I usually say spend 50% of your time marketing your art and 50% of your time making art. Do more things. So sometimes I talk to an artist and they're selling their work, but all they're really doing is posting to Facebook, or maybe posting to Instagram, or maybe they send an email out like twice a year. Do more things. Maybe send emails and post to Instagram and Facebook, and have a group or a solo show, and so on and so forth. Do the right things. There are a lot of artists who waste a lot of time doing things like putting up shows in vanity galleries where there's no foot traffic. You pay to rent a space and you put up your work and nobody comes through, right? Or you post to LinkedIn. I get artists asking me all the time, LinkedIn? Should I be posting to LinkedIn? Probably not. Unless you're looking for licensing deals, and then you're pretty much only using LinkedIn to reach out to purchasing agents and licensing agents. Have clearer goals. And the further I get into this, the more artists that I talk to, the more important I think this is. It's important for you to know for yourself why you want to sell your work and what success means for you. If you live in New York City, your financial goals are going to be substantially higher than if you live in Portland, Oregon, where I live. It's just a fact that you're just going to need to make more money to live. And so knowing like what your minimum expenses are and what a big win would be for you is important. But beyond the financial goals, knowing what kind of recognition you want. Do you want to be written up in the New York Times? Do you want Jerry Saltz to write about you? Do you want to be recognized as a museum and blue chip gallery artist? Or do you just want to make a financial living? Both of those things are acceptable. It's important for you to know which one is important for you. So, the struggle is real. Being an artist is hard. Running any business is hard, but being an artist is hard because you're taking a piece of something that you care about deeply, you're putting it on a canvas or on a sculpture, and you're pouring your emotion into it, and then you say, hey, do you want to buy this? Do you like me? That's hard. So, some of the struggles that I see, art that doesn't present a clear vision. A lot of artists, they tell me, oh, I just wake up in the morning and I paint whatever I want. If you do that, there is a very, very small chance that when you paint whatever you want, like a theme will magically emerge and you'll create a series. But usually that doesn't happen. Usually you need to think deeply about your art, about what you are responding to in the world, and how people are going to perceive your art. And I'm not talking about making something that you think is going to sell, and I'm not talking about making something that is purely commercial. I'm saying, are you communicating something through your work? And then day jobs. Day jobs are a necessary evil, but they get in the way, right? If only I didn't have to work, I could sell so much art. Family commitments. Your spouse or your partner wants your time for some weird reason. Your kids demand that you give them some attention and feed them. Pricing is a psychological game. How many of you hate pricing your work? Yeah, only if like 5 of you raised your hands. I don't believe the rest of you. Pricing is a psychological game that will crush you and leave you crying in the corner. We're going to talk more about pricing later. And fear. Fear. What if they don't like my art? What if nobody likes me? What if people think I'm ugly? What if somebody criticizes me? What if I don't know what I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. For you self-trained artists, I didn't go to art school. I didn't get a BFA. I didn't get an MFA. I see some of you crying right now. Okay, who am I? I am Corey Huff, and I run a company called The Abundant Artist. It's at theabundantartist.com. I started this blog in 2009. I come from a theater background. I'm an actor or performer, and all of my friends when I was in college are artists and performers. And when I graduated from college, I was like, oh, I need a day job. So my first day job was at an internet marketing agency in Portland, Oregon. And while I was there, I started a blog on the side that was just an exploration of how do creative people make money from their work. And I just started asking my friends, how do you make money? Do you have friends that make money? How do they do it? And people started introducing me to their friends, and I would interview people and say, how do you do it? And publish that as blog posts, and then write about my internet marketing background and what I was learning at my day job. And that sort of grew until people started asking me to start helping them sell their work, get people to their shows. And since then, it's been, 8 years? I've had an opportunity to lecture here. I lectured here last year. I speak at universities all over. I run online courses. And we've had about 20,000 artists come through our online courses. And we've helped dozens of artists be able to quit their day jobs and make a living from selling their art. So that's who I am, just so that you know a little bit about me and where I come from. And the hidden path. So from these 20,000 artists that have come through our courses and the several dozen very successful six-figure or more artists that we've interviewed on our podcast, I've broken down the early stage of an art career into 4 distinct stages of the hidden path. And these are the things that these artists are doing that makes them financially successful. And the reason it's a hidden path is because it doesn't get talked about in art school, it doesn't get talked about in general, and most of the artists who are doing it are so busy selling their art and delivering their art that they're not really talking about it very much. They're sitting in their studio working, right? So stage 1, working with a vision. So this is a screenshot from Adam Hall's website. He's an artist based in New Orleans. And a few years ago, Adam came to us. He took a course with us, and he started writing about his art. How many of you hate writing about your art? Yeah. All of you who didn't raise your hands are still liars. Adam, well, before we talk about his writing about his art, I want to talk about why he makes the art that he makes. So Adam is from New Orleans, and he lived in New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina hit. And he saw the neighborhoods that he grew up in go underwater, be destroyed. A lot of the houses were condemned. And he realized that the city he loved was being destroyed, and he wanted to preserve the spirit of New Orleans, to let people know about what the city is all about and what it's like. So he started painting scenes from his childhood, painting scenes from the neighborhood that he lived in, and he wasn't having a lot of success. He wasn't getting a lot of traction. So that's the reason he came and took one of our classes, and he started writing about his passion and love for the city of New Orleans. And he found out that by sharing some of that behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on with him and his art, people started really connecting with it. People started loving what he was doing, and he would literally he would send out weekly emails, and if he missed a week, his audience would email him back and be like, "Where's our weekly newsletter?" Can you imagine having that? Like, people love your weekly newsletter so much that they're like, "Where is it?" when it doesn't come out. And even better than that is his weekly newsletter was producing sales. So some of it was online, some of it was people emailing him back and saying, "I want the piece that you talked about in your newsletter," or going to his website and buying it there. But even more than that, it was getting local people to come out to his shows, to his booth at local art shows, and saying, "Hey, I read your email about this painting. I wanted to come and see it in person so that I could buy it." And then people would say, "Oh, you already sold it? I want to buy a print." All just from sharing the background behind his work. And I said divorce making from selling on here. He learned that whether he sold his work or not, his work had emotional value, because people would respond to all of his stories and to all of his pieces, even if they didn't buy them. And he started learning that making art is a different skill than selling art. And it's okay to be good at one and not at the other. You can learn both of them, right? People ask me, how many pieces of art do I need to have to go to market? There's no set number. There's not a magical figure. I always tell artists, you need at least 5 pieces that are of a series, that are inspired by the same theme or topic. At least 5 before you go set up a booth somewhere and try to sell your work. And if you can't get to 5, you might want to rethink why you're making art or why you're selling art if you can't get to 5. I mean, unless they're the size of this wall, I don't know. So, day jobs. Doug Savage, one of my favorite cartoonists. Everybody hates day jobs until everybody tells you, how does this go again? Yeah, you can see it. I can't see it from here. I can't remember it from the top of my brain. So day jobs. I asked a handful of artists that I know who are pretty successful, how did they handle the transition from having a full-time day job to selling their art? How many of you have full-time day jobs? A bunch of you, okay. So Matt LeBlanc, not the actor, the painter. Matt is based in Canada, and he was an advertising agency art director. And basically he said, it's a marathon. If you want to go full-time in your art career, it's a marathon. You have to be willing to put in the work, and it's not about, can I do it next month? It's about, can I build a slow and steady pace to the point where I'm able to take off? Hugh McLeod runs gapingvoid.com. His clients are big corporate collectors. His work is on the walls at Rackspace and Microsoft and a bunch of other big tech companies. And he uses his art as a backdoor way to get into the companies and get them to change their culture and be more open. So his art is about more than just a piece of art hanging on the wall. It's about changing culture. He said, if you accept the pain, it cannot hurt you. Basically, being an artist is hard. If you have a day job, you're going to have to work some extra hours. And then Kelly Ray Roberts, probably a lot of you have heard of Kelly Ray, about $15 million in sales over the last 10 years or so. Kelly Ray is a mixed media artist based in Portland, Oregon, where I live, and she's a very positive person. She's a little less about the pain here, but basically saying, you got to have a vision. It's possible to do. She was a full-time social worker before she became a full-time artist in her 30s. So how do you handle the day job? Be conscious of your time. So if we all have the same amount of time, so if this person can do it, you can do it. One of the things that I always tell artists is, okay, if you have a calendar and you've got your 40-hour work week for your day job, then get up an hour early, work for an hour every morning doing email, doing whatever marketing makes sense that you can do in that hour. And then every Tuesday and Thursday night, when you get home from work on your art business from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock or 6 o'clock to midnight, whatever your stamina will allow for. And set that up like it's a second job. And if you need to, have your spouse or your partner or some other friend, another artist, hold you accountable. Maybe you turn in your timesheet to them so that you know that you're putting in the work and you can't let yourself off the hook. Sacrifice, so you maybe let go of some of the TV watching. I know that Scandal is super interesting, but maybe watch it later. I like Scandal. None of you laughed, but okay. Take care of yourself. Your health has to be good. You can only work 40 hours a week at the day job and 40 hours a week on your art business for so long before you collapse. 80 hours a week is too much for almost everybody, especially over an extended period of time. Take care of your health, eat well, exercise. I learned this the hard way. You need to exercise, just trust me on this. And pick the most important activity. If you only have a limit, so yesterday I spent a half day with an artist here in New York. She's already relatively successful, but she was totally overwhelmed with the amount of work that she was doing, the amount of things that she was doing. She was, she had shows and she was doing Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and emailing, and she was learning Facebook advertising, and you start to get the idea of maybe she was a little bit overwhelmed. So what we did is we cut out all of her marketing except for two things. She refocused her marketing on working with art directors in commercial projects and Instagram. And we cut out all the other things in her busyness, because those were the things that were already bringing her a lot of traction and already bringing her sales. And so we just had her double down on that. And you could tell by the end of the day, she was like totally lifted and relaxed and happy. So if you feel like you're doing too much, if you feel like you're like all over the board, it's okay to refocus on just one or two core marketing activities until they start to bring in significant income. And then 10 hours a week minimum. And I mentioned at the top of this section the 50-50 rule. Spend 50% of your time on business, 50% of your time on making new art. And of course that varies a little bit. If you've got 750 pieces of art in your garage that nobody's ever seen, maybe spend a little less time making new art and spend a little more time marketing. You're laughing because you've probably done it, but I had an artist in the UK 2 years ago who had 750 pieces in her garage and nobody had ever seen them. And she was like, I can't figure out why I'm not selling anything. Because she was spending all of her time making new work. So, all right. Talk to the family. Those of you who have a spouse, if you have a spouse who's marketing your art for you, thank them very much. Be very kind to them. If you have a spouse who's not involved in your art business, talk to them and say, hey, I'm actually pretty serious about this. This is a real business, a real thing for me. And I'd appreciate it if you could help me figure out a way to spend those 10, 15, 20 hours a week on my art business. Maybe you take the kids and go out of the house for one or two nights a week, or just keep them away from me for 1 or 2 nights a week. Maybe you can handle dinner tonight. Get their buy-in. Your kids, if they're old enough, if they're like over the age of 6, I don't know, I don't have kids, I don't know what the right developmental stage is for this, but at some point, your children are going to understand that you are working on something that's really important, and you can get their buy-in. You can get them to help you. You can get the older kid to babysit the younger kid. It works. My wife is second of 9 kids, and she babysat her younger siblings from the age of like 6 up. So you can get your older kids to work on the younger kids. Make specific asks. Understand that some critics are not worth listening to. As much as you love your spouse, mother, friend, sister, brother, they don't have an art business, unless they do, and they maybe don't have a business at all. They don't, like, if you don't run a business, you don't understand the stress and the frustration that comes with running your own business. Even if you have a job, you don't understand what it's like to run a business. So some people are just not worth listening to when it comes to criticism. They love you and they want the best for you, and they might want to tell you what kind of art you should be making. Well, why don't you make what that person's making? They're selling it. That doesn't make any sense at all. Don't listen to them. Pricing. The pricing game is so much fun. It's so much fun trying to price your art. Why is this piece sell at $100 and that piece sell at $1,000 and Damien Hirst's 12-foot shark submerged in a tank of formaldehyde sell for $12 million? Doesn't make any sense at all. Linear inch pricing. How many of you already do this? No, okay. A couple of you, okay. Square foot, that's fine too. Inch, foot, centimeter, whatever the unit of measurement is, it's okay to attach a formula to your pricing, and I promise you will make it so much easier on yourself, and you have so much less heartache if you just put a formula to your pricing. It's literally length plus the width. So if you have a 3-foot by 3-foot piece, it's 3 plus 3 equals 6. Everybody can do that math, multiplied by some dollar amount. Now, what that dollar amount is depends on the medium you're making. It depends on where you're at in your career, what the demand is for your work, and where you stand in relation to other artists whose work is similar to yours. You should be able to rattle off the top of your head 10 to 20 artists whose work is similar to yours, just for the sake of knowing where you stand in the marketplace. If you can't, then you need to go do some research on the internet and find, I would encourage you to find 30 artists whose work is related to yours in some way. Look at their pricing and say, how popular are they? How good is their work? And how does my work compare to theirs? And find a price. Yeah?
How much should you take experience into account? Maybe that artist is selling
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question was, how much should you take experience into account? And I would say experience only matters if that artist is selling, if they've proven a market for their art. So if that artist is selling like crazy and you're not selling, but your work is like roughly equal in quality, then price your work less than theirs, but not a lot less. Yeah. And it is totally acceptable to grow with demand and to start with low prices. I know that I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but a lot of galleries will grab emerging artists and they'll say, that piece you're selling for $200, I want you to sell it for $10,000. And you need to be really, really careful at this point. It's not necessarily a non-starter or a bad idea, but you need to be really careful because once you go to 10 grand, you can't necessarily go back without causing a lot of problems. So it is perfectly acceptable, and I would encourage you to sell your work to the point where you get to significant prices, and whatever significant means to you, 5, 10, 20 grand, whatever. And you can do that before you start selling in galleries so that you have a base of collectors and people who are interested in your work already, so that if that gallery ever goes away, you still have a core group of people who love your work, who you have a connection with. Because I've seen it happen over and over again. Artists who are making $200,000, $300,000 a year selling through galleries, the gallery owner dies, goes away, decides to change direction, or sells the gallery, and you have no more revenue. So build your own collector base. Fear. Fear is the mind killer. Anybody watch Dune? No? Okay. The AV guy watches Dune. Awesome. So galleries. Galleries induce fear in you and in your collectors. I don't know if you know this or not. You may have been in the art world for too long, but buying art is horribly intimidating. Last night I was hanging out with a few friends here in Manhattan, and they're all pretty well off. They're probably people who are in some of your target markets. One of them is a New York Times bestselling author twice over. She's looking at a $5 million apartment. And I was like, have you ever bought art before? And she was like, no, it's like too confusing. So my point here is, as much as you're afraid of selling your art, your collectors are actually afraid of buying it. They're afraid of asking you questions about your work. They're afraid of offending you. So it's your opportunity and your obligation as an artist to dissuade some of those fears and make them feel a little more comfortable. The white box is intimidating because there's like not enough information, right? There's a 5-foot piece of art here with a little plaque right here, and it says, the name of the art, and then it says the name of the artist, and it says $5,000. And if you're not like an art world person, you walk in there and you go, why is that $5,000? If I buy that and put that on my wall, are my friends gonna laugh at me because I paid $5,000 for that piece of art? Well, somebody else might go in and go, oh, $5,000 for that artist? That's amazing, I'm gonna buy it right now. So instead of spending all your time trying to get that person who already knows, maybe talk to some of the people who don't know and educate them and connect with them. And if you're sitting around waiting for the right collector to come along, the right gallery to come along, the right big break to come along, you've got your head in the sand. Get your head out of the sand and go do some stuff. What stuff? Let me tell you. Deal with fear. If you're still like, I don't know. If you're being held back by your own fear, here's some strategies that you can take. My favorite question is, what's the very worst thing that could happen if you show your art and start selling your art and start asking people to buy your art? Usually the very worst thing that'll happen is somebody will laugh at you. The very worst thing that'll happen is somebody will be like, no. And who cares? You don't know that person. And if some critic writes about you and says that your work is terrible, actually that's probably gonna help you sell your work. If some critic comes along, if Jerry Saltz is like, this is the worst crap I've ever seen, I guarantee you'll make a sale the next day. Because people are going to be like, why? Yeah, okay. So where do I focus next? What do I do once I've got my mind right and I understand that I can sell my work and that I can go forward? What do I do with my time? There's lots of opportunities. There's Facebook. There's Instagram. Vogue says Instagram is the next big art dealer. There's email marketing. There's all kinds of email marketing options, Constant Contact and all MailChimp and all these others. How many of you have an email newsletter? Raise your hands high. You're awesome. You're way ahead of the game. All right. How many of you have a website with Shopify or Fine Art Studios Online or Squarespace or something like that? And how many of you are still too confused by the options? It's okay if you are. Keep it simple, especially if you're in very early stages. But before we talk about some of the ways to keep it simple, I want to talk a little bit about your life and what you want your life to look like. And even if you're already selling art and you're already like making some good money, I want you to listen to this next part, because one of the challenges that I see artists have going from, okay, I'm making just enough to get by, to making significant money and being able to buy a house and have some of those nicer things, has to do with what I'm going to outline here. There are 5 common business models that make sense for artists, ways to sell your work, and they all have to do with how you want your life to look. The most common way, or the way, not the most common way, but the way that many artists think about selling their work is through galleries, right? Probably some of you that are showing your work here are hoping that a gallery will pick up your work and sell it. We all know what this is. The gallery takes the work, they sell it, they give you a percentage of the sale. That might be 40, 50, 60%, depending on what the gallery deal is. This is actually not the most common way that artists sell their work. The most common way that an artist sells their work is direct to collector. And by direct to collector, I mean like literally just at a show with my tent, somebody comes and sees my work and they buy it. It also means on the internet. Somebody goes to my website and buys it there. Or somebody says, oh, I heard you're an artist. What's your work? And you whip out your iPad and show them some of your work and they're like, oh, cool, can you ship that to my place? It happens. I've seen it happen, been in the room. The third way is prints and products. So do you want to sell prints of your work and products, like this might be calendars with your stuff on it or bags with your stuff on it, whatever that means to you. And I'm talking about painting a lot here. This also applies to mixed media and sculpture work. There are sculpture artists out there who are selling the 3D printing instructions for their work and selling sculptures that somebody can download to their 3D printer and print out of plastic or metal. So that's coming in the very near future. That's going to be a big deal. So for those of you who are doing three-dimensional work, that's something to look into. Commissions. And I outline commissions here because commissions are a very different process from taking something that you've thought of and making it and putting it out into the world. A commission business is a service business. You're saying, hey, this is my style and this is the way I work, but then somebody else is telling you what to make. And if you don't like that, if you don't like being art directed, and you don't, and like worrying about whether or not somebody likes the thing you make for them gives you like heartburn and anxiety, you don't have to do commissions. You don't have to. And for some reason, a lot of artists think that they do have to. And if you love doing commissions, you can make a living just doing commissions. I know plenty of artists that do that. And then the final one is licensing. This is pretty straightforward, but for those of you who don't know, licensing is just there are companies that need your image, your artwork on their images, mugs, calendars, surfboards, whatever. And those companies have buyers who are out looking for art images who they will pay you a royalty, an upfront fee plus maybe a royalty on each piece sold if you let them put your images on their product. That doesn't work for every artist, but for some of you that's a good option. So the reason that I say that these things have to do with what you want your life to look like is each of these things require different kinds of actions. I think a lot of artists are really attracted to the idea of selling art through galleries because the idea is that you hand the work off and you don't do anything. But if any of you that are listening are represented by a gallery, you know that there's still a fair bit of work to do. You still have to show up at gallery openings, you got to do talks, you got to ship the work a lot of times. I estimate that most artists that are successfully selling through galleries are still spending minimum 20 to 30% of their time on the business administrative side of their work, unless they have a studio assistant that they're paying to do it or something like that. And so each of these things has a different way of being in the world, a different lifestyle associated with them. And it's okay to pick one based on the kind of life you want to have and the kind of art that you make. So, conversing with friends. Let's get into some specific selling, like how do you sell online? I think a lot of times we make it too hard. Like if I'm having a conversation with you right now and I don't have a mic on and I'm not in front of a camera and we're just like two people standing there having a conversation and you've got some of your art on the wall, you probably know how to have that conversation, I imagine. You probably know how to say, oh, what interests you about this work? Why do you think that? What makes you feel that way? Would you like to take this home today? Cash or credit? But when we get online, we start reading like all these marketing experts, and people are like, oh, you got to post to Instagram 5 times a day, and it's got to be about one of each topic, one of these 5 topics on a different day, and you got to make sure that you don't post when Mercury's in retrograde, and I don't know. There are formulas, but the formulas are all meant to just get you to take action. But really, it just comes down to having a conversation with people and being a little bit open about your process and making an emotional connection with people. So Sandra Dieckmann is an artist that I follow. She's got 300,000 plus people following her on Facebook. She's also got a substantial following on Instagram. And she's one of these artists that does quite well online. She shares her work. She shares what's going on. She travels. She does funny things with her friends. And people dig it, right? The other day, I was doing a presentation online from my apartment, and my cat was meowing in the background. And the comment section on the presentation lit up. Like, people, I love your cat. Your cat sounds so cute. Like, people love that stuff. But we get so in our head about business and about presenting a professional demeanor, or whatever the right word is, that we psych ourselves out of a sale and psych ourselves out of a connection with our audience. Work in progress. So all of these screenshots, by the way, are just artists that I know or have worked with in the past. Natasha Westcoat, she's been around. If you saw her tree art, you probably recognize it. It's pretty much ubiquitous on the internet. But this is a new series of work that she was doing. Work in progress posts. People love work in progress posts. You have no idea how many people are like stalking your social, like, oh, I saw that piece getting worked on a couple weeks ago. I wonder if it's done yet. They go back, oh, I don't know. Is it done yet? Oh, I don't know. Oh, there it is again, in action. There's a video of it being made. Is it ready for sale yet? There are people following your social right now who are doing that. So go on, post some work in progress photos and then let them know that it's finished. Jamie Poole, UK artist. This is an installation piece. I show this to show that it's not just paintings. It's not just small pieces. This is a big installation piece that Jamie Poole did at a private school in the UK. They're a 100-year-old private school. They've had thousands of people go there. So each of that installation is made of thousands of small strips of paper with an individual name printed on it. And he paper mache'd that into an installation. And so this blog post that he wrote was about the background of the school, how they asked him to create this installation, and what his thinking was as he was creating it. Not how to, not this is how I created it and how you can do it too. We're not turning you into art teachers. Think movie trailers, right? Like, I love the Star Wars movie trailer that just came out. Like, it's like 30 seconds long. I watched it more times than I care to admit. That happens with art videos as well. Like those, and I didn't mention this earlier, but people look at art making as magic. And we all forget that because we spend our day in it. Like, it's no big deal for you to like sketch out what you're gonna draw and then paint it, and it takes you a couple of hours to make a small painting, and you make a little video of that happening and somebody looks at it and goes, how the heck did that happen? I must own that. Because they can't comprehend the amount of time and effort that has gone into what you know how to do. And so for them, it's magic. So let them see the magic. All right, be yourself. Ashley Longshore, anybody follow Ashley on Instagram? She's got a pretty big following. So Ashley, she spent 20 years trying to get galleries to represent her and didn't have any success. She's a pop artist. She's really, what's the word I'm looking for? She's kind of vulgar and loud. She lives in Manhattan. She's perfect fit for that sort of Manhattan personality. And when Instagram came along, her career exploded. It's funny because she's only got about 35,000 followers on Instagram, but her followers are like obsessed. They're rabid fans. And every time she posts a new work in progress or a new finished piece on her easel, she sells it. She'll sell a piece by taking a picture from her studio, put it on Instagram, and sell it for 5 to 10 grand, just for a small canvas. She does celebrity portraits for 80 grand. And the primary way that she markets herself is Instagram. And in addition to her work in progress posts and her finished pieces on Instagram, she also just finds random stuff on the internet that amuses her and posts it on Instagram. And so for those of you that are like, oh, I need to present this really curated, well thought out, no, she's like drunk in her apartment on a Friday night surfing the internet and finds something that's really weird, and she takes a screenshot and posts it on Instagram because she thinks it's funny. And her followers think it's funny. And then people like it so much, they buy it. And Vogue magazine writes an article about how people are selling art on Instagram, and they highlight her as a prime example of how to do it. So websites, how many of you have e-commerce websites right now? Like, I can put in a credit card on your website right now and buy something. Like a third of you. Okay, great. The rest of you, here's your homework assignment when you're done this weekend. Go home and upgrade your website to an e-commerce website. Now, it's got to be within your budget, et cetera, but put it on your list. This is Randall Ford. He's an animal photographer. He's photoshopped, this is website homepage. He's photoshopped a steer, a water buffalo, whatever that is. I'm going to get crucified for that. So he's photoshopped a framed picture of one of his prints in somebody's living room. There's like 5 apps in the App Store right now that will do this for you. It's super easy to do, and it's really effective marketing because people don't have any imagination, and they look at your art and they go, oh, how big is it? And it says right there, it says 8 by 10, and they, how big is an 8 by 10? Use one of those apps, put your work in context so people can understand it, and then add a store. Add a store. How much money do you think somebody will pay for a piece of art through a website that they just buy with a credit card, not having seen it before? 5 grand? More. 10 grand? More. The biggest online transaction that I've seen is about $50,000. Somebody punched in a credit card, or it wasn't a credit card, it was a, what do you call it, a wire transfer for a $50,000 piece. And of course, Sotheby's and Christie's are doing more than that through their online auctions. So if you're thinking, oh, I can't put my $5,000 price on my website, you're wrong. People will buy a $5,000 piece of online with a credit card. It definitely happens, yeah. Is it just really well-known artists? No. A couple of years ago, Jason Horace, who runs Xanadu Art Gallery, told me a story. He had an artist that he put on his website. He just barely put them there, and somebody that he had never spoken to went to his website, looked around a little bit, saw a piece from this new artist. It was $8,800. They punched in their credit card. He shipped it off. That was it. If somebody who has money sees something that they want, they'll buy it. A couple things. So options, if you're selling prints, you can do things with e-commerce. You can do things like have size, frame type, and other things that you might want to think, like if it's printed on paper or canvas or metal. There are websites that will do all of that for you. If you don't want to have that built from the ground up, like something like artstorefronts.com will handle all of the print various stuff for you. They'll build the website for you. Email lists. I saw a couple of you have email lists. You should have an email list. If you're selling original work, I don't recommend that you incentivize people to join your mailing list with a discount code. I don't think we should discount original art, but discounts work really well for prints because you're doing high volume and people like to buy stuff in volume with discounts. There are other ways you can incentivize people to join your mailing list if you are selling original art, and that comes down to your story. What is your art about? I mentioned Adam Hall earlier. His work is all about New Orleans. So he tells people, join my mailing list, and I'm going to share stories about New Orleans with you. So people join his mailing list to hear stories about New Orleans. There's an artist in Portland, Oregon. She's an emerging artist, just getting started. A lot of her work is very dark but interesting takes on fairy tales. And so she has on her website, you can take a quiz to learn what kind of inner magical creature you have. And at the end of it, you have an option of joining her mailing list to learn how to bring that magical creature out. And then, of course, once you join the mailing list, it's just a series of educational emails about how her art helps you bring out your own magical creature. It sounds silly, but it's effective and it's working for her. She just got featured in a big spread in Fairy Magazine. How many of you have heard of Fairy Magazine? It's got a big readership, and her work is perfect for it. Which brings up something I don't think it's in this presentation, but I'll just talk about it for a second. There are niche publications in just about any kind of subject matter or idea, and far too many artists, when they're looking for press, excuse me, when they're looking for press, they try to only go after the art magazines. So they all go after Hyperallergic and Boom and Colossal and the Professional Artist magazine and try to either buy ads there or get featured in an article there. But Fairy Magazine is full of people who are super interested in dark fairy tale art, and it was perfect for her. There are travel magazines that talk about the Oregon coast or any coast. So if you like to paint those places, there are magazines and blogs about the Grand Canyon. So if you're on the plein air circuit and you're doing Grand Canyon stuff, you can get press from some of those organizations. There are endless numbers of them. So why sales don't happen? What time is it here? 12:16. Okay, we got time. Why sales don't happen. I'm going to stick around when we're done. I'll stick around and talk to anybody, answer questions. Why sales don't happen. No clear vision or benefit. So we talked about what it means to work in a series and having a clear vision of who you are as an artist and what your work is about. After you've sold a few pieces or after you've had an opportunity to talk to a handful of potential collectors, people are going to start asking you questions like, why should I buy this? And having an idea of what people get out of having your art can be really beneficial. And this starts to sound a little bit like I get criticized for saying this because art doesn't have a tangible market benefit, but art has an emotional benefit. And you should know what that is. So when you're talking to people about your work and they're describing it or reacting to it, look for emotional words. Things like, this art makes me feel peaceful. This art makes me feel excited. This art makes me remember my childhood. Like things like that, those are the kind of words you want to use in your marketing. So when you're talking to people about your work, pay attention to those words and then put those words into your sales pitch and your marketing. No sales platform. If you don't have a website, you don't have a place to sell your work, it's going to be much harder for you to sell your work. People need to be exposed to your work multiple times before they buy it. So you should have a place where they can go, whether that's a website or an Instagram or something. No customers. Keep it simple. So if you're making less than $500 to $1,000 per month in art sales, then you want to stay really focused. You don't need to invest in anything complex. You don't need a $2,000 website or a $10,000 website that costs $50 a month that has all the bells and whistles and will do everything for you. You don't need a complicated email marketing platform. All you need to do is start having conversations with people and asking them to buy your art. It's really straightforward. Stories, not tools. We talked about that. It's about making an emotional connection with your art. A lot of artists think, oh, if the right person comes along at the right time, they're going to love my work, and there's not really anything that I can do, and that's just not true. Hollywood has conditioned us to think that the meet cute is normal, right? Like guys walking down the street and girls riding her bike down this street, and they run into each other, they fall down, they stand up and they look at each other, and it's the music swells and everybody falls in love. It doesn't work that way in dating. It doesn't work that way in real life. We all swipe left on everybody. And it works the same way for art. Not like I walked around the corner at the moment, I saw Jackson Pollock's piece there at the moment, and I was like, that's amazing. But that doesn't happen for everybody. Other people walk around the corner and they see Jackson Pollock and they go, my kid could do that, right? And like all of us are like, oh, no, they couldn't. But that's what happens. But people see your work multiple times, and they hear about the context, they hear about the stories, they hear about your emotion that went into it, and then they start to get it, and something will click. So it's not just one time. Websites. It's totally okay to just have social media and PayPal to get started. I posted this piece on Instagram. Somebody said, oh, I really want to buy that. You say, great. You direct message them your PayPal address and say, hey, here's how much it is, PayPal the amount, and your shipping address to that email address, and I will ship it to you. It totally happens, and I'm going to show you an example. Sarah O'Connor, we did a challenge in January of this year as the Instagram challenge where we encouraged all the artists to follow us online to share their work on Instagram under the hashtag TAA Instagram challenge or TAA IG challenge, something like that. Anyway, Sarah started a new series of work, this pointillism bubble stuff, in September of last year, and she started the series in September, had a handful of pieces ready to go by November or December, and then in January started the Instagram challenge and sold her first, December is when we did the Instagram challenge, and sold a $770 piece of art that December. And since then she's gone on to build out a website and to do a lot more stuff, but this was her first sale, really straightforward, really easy. How many of you think there's no market for my art? Like, how many of you have wondered, like, maybe my art is too weird or too narrow? What about vice presidents of the United States with octopus drawn on their heads? This is a thing. Jonathan Crow did a Kickstarter campaign. He came and we talked about it, and we identified that his audience, people who enjoy history, people who like weird things, people who are into horror or octopus were some of his target audience. So we did a crowdfunding campaign. He raised $15,000 for a book full of illustrations of vice presidents of the United States with octopuses. Octopi is not the plural of octopuses. Did you know that? Okay. So that was really fun. So who is your perfect collector? If you're just getting started, you may not know. You may have to make some educated guesses. But who loves your work? Talk to some of your past collectors and say, why did you buy my work? What made you interested in it? How did you find out about me? And then get really, really nosy and ask some things like, where do you live? What's your job? What are your hobbies? Because weird things happen. Like there's an artist that I met earlier this year. She lives in Louisville, Kentucky. And she was doing a show in Louisville, and a lawyer came into her tent and bought her work. And then a couple weeks later, a few more lawyers came into her tent and bought her work. And so she started asking questions. She said, why are all these lawyers buying my work? And it turns out that that first lawyer had put up her work in his office and then started talking about it and had a bunch of other lawyers over to his office for some kind of meeting. And all those other lawyers were like, this lawyer is really important, so I want to buy the art that he buys. And it turns out that that was just enough to blow her career up to the point where lawyers all throughout the Midwest come to Louisville to her little tent at this art show during the summer and buy her work. And so her target collector is lawyers, just lawyers. And she's doing really well. So pay attention to who your collectors are, find out what they do, what they have in common. And so now she's being really smart. She's going out to other cities and finding law offices in those other cities and sending them flyers saying, hey, all these other lawyers bought my work. I think you should buy it too, and it's working. So we talked about Adam Hall a little bit. I'm just going to fast forward through some of this stuff. The hero's journey, if you haven't read the book, The Man with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, it's a really great way of understanding the hero's story. And the hero's story is like the most common story in the world. It's Luke Skywalker's story. It's the story of Jesus. It's the story of Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games. We love this story. Humans love this story. Our brains are wired to it. If you can figure out how to tell your own version of the hero's journey on your About page on your website, through your marketing, people will start to connect with your work. And then you can take it up a notch, and you can start to understand the hero's journey of your collector. What is the lifestyle like for a lawyer? And how can you turn yourself into the mystical guide that guides your collectors to a spiritual discovery or an emotional discovery or just having some more joy in their life? All right. I'm going to end a little bit early here. Can you just go ahead and shut this down? I want to talk a little bit, as we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about Henri Murger. Anybody know Henri? He wrote a book called A Day in the Life of the Bohemian. No? Okay. I love that nobody ever knows this story because it's actually a really important story. So in the 1800s, this writer named Henri Murger was living in the Latin Quarter in Paris, where the students live. It's near the Sorbonne. Anybody been there? And Henri decided to write some stories about his friends. They were he and his other friends were all starving writers, artists, musicians, struggling to get by. And he wrote this series of stories lionizing them. They were, the next great visionaries. They were these amazing artists that just couldn't catch a break. Nobody knew who they were. And the book did really, really well. The book inspired a popular play that was inspired a bunch of French people to dress up like poor starving artists and go hang out in the Latin Quarter and drink coffee with the starving artists. And the play inspired an opera called La Bohème, which is very famous, and which inspired a musical called Rent, which is very famous. And so it inspired this many generations of starving artists to go hang out in Paris and either be poor in Paris or pretend to be poor in Paris. And the funny thing is, in the introduction to the book, Henri says that the bohemian life is a stage in an artist's life. And either you move on from that stage to either become a member of the Academy, the Hotel Dieu, or the Morgue. And what I interpret that to mean is either you learn the things that professional artists do to become a successful artist, or you go to the Hotel Dieu, you go insane, or you go to the morgue, or you die. It's a choice you have. Being a starving artist is a choice that people make. And I've seen too many artists figure out how to pull themselves out of the starving artist stage and be very successful to believe otherwise. And final story, Monet. So Monet was an independent artist who didn't want to do what the art establishment wanted him to do. At the time, the French Academy dictated who got to sell their art, right? And the Academy's work, almost all the artists in the Academy, it was brown, it was kind of flat, and it was mostly like portraits of boring nobles. And Monet, of course, didn't want to do any of that. He wanted to paint sunsets, and he wanted to paint water lilies, and he wanted to explore the way that light worked. But the Academy didn't like his work, and they wouldn't have him in the Academy. He couldn't sell his work through them. So he got together with a bunch of other unknown artists like Degas, and they put on their own show that was directly competitive with the Academy's show. And at that show, this art critic came, and he saw Monet's painting of a sunset, and he wrote in his review the next day, he said, "That's not a painting of a sunset, that's barely an impression of a sunset. These impressionists don't know what they're doing." And Monet and the other early impressionists grabbed that word, impressionists, and they said, "Great, we're impressionists." They used it as an epithet, we're gonna use it as our title. And they created a whole new art movement. And this happens over and over again. The Young British Artists, the Armory Art Show here in New York, there are endless examples of artists taking it upon themselves to do what they want to do and sell in the way that they want to sell, rather than doing what the art establishment has told them that they have to do. My point in sharing that is to say that I believe that right now is another one of those times. Artists who are figuring out how to sell their work online, artists who are figuring out how to do what they want to do, are creating a new way for art to be shared. There's all kinds of really cool emerging art that's coming out on the internet and digitally. So I believe that if you want to, you can sell your work and make a living at it. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with me here today. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions. Happy to talk about internet marketing or about just the lifestyle of being an art entrepreneur. Thank you very much, and have a great day.